These are inhumane working conditions, Ryan. I can't work like this.
Yeah, I mean, you don't earn any money. Like, I don't pay you anything.
Exactly. So at the very least, I can have a window open.
But also, I feel like that's unreasonable expectations.
It's just a window.
You're getting exposure, dear. That's why you're here.
Dear. Don't dear me, honey.
Don't honey me, friend.
I was working the other day, and I was talking to somebody who tattoos me and her partner. And her partner was complaining about something, and I walked up and went, "Don't worry, Poppet, you'll be all right." And he looked at me and I went, "I will be if you call me Poppet again." And I was like, "Oh no, I've started something here. I'm the over-friendly barman."
And in the most British way possible, nearly starting a fight using the word poppet. The most quintessentially British thing you could ever do. Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyra podcast. The podcast where I, Ryan, also known to be as Comic Stan, you didn't hear that, get my real book stan of a bloke best friend, whatever.
Best friend. Best friends.
Oh, that was it. I'm going to regret that ad lib now.
Best friend.
I've opened a can of worms here. Basically, I make him read comics, even though he doesn't want to, and then I make him talk about them. And they're sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes mid, and everything in between. And with me, as always, is my aforementioned Shamazing co-host, it's Jamie.
Shamazing.
I kind of trying to extrapolate from Shazam.
By
the way, we were doing Shazam today.
Yeah, if you didn't get that from Shamazing.
Yes.
There is a guitar YouTube channel called Andertons, which I watched a lot when I was learning about guitars, and they coined a term for cheap guitars, which was shaffordable.
That's good. That's good.
They'd be like, today we're doing another shaffordable guitar.
Like your superhero shenanigans. It's always SH.
Yeah.
Of all the examples
it's
we've
a fun
used.
sound.
Yeah, well, can't disagree with that. And we're Shazamming Shazam today. If you haven't seen the title,
you in a minute.
I probably should explain from the cold open, we are recording in a hot room today at one of our behest and the other's protest.
Yeah, I'm not happy about it.
Exactly. But we are, well, maybe we'll go short, maybe we won't. I don't know. I've got a nice cold soft drink and you've got a cold tepid water.
Yeah.
I got you an ice cream before we started.
Yeah, no, there was ice cream. There's ice cold water. So I think, I don't know what it is, but and you can come at me in the comments if you want. In fact, I invite you to do so. Water, once it's been refrigerated, tastes funny.
It tastes different, but I like the taste. I agree with you, but I prefer it. And
I love ice cold water, but what I want is a tepid water that has been chilled with ice.
Nah. Fridge water. Love it. I've got a jug and I'll just drink straight out of the jug.
See, the thing that I do, and I'm going to sound mental now, is that I have a soda stream and I will prepare a jug of ice water and then pour it into the soda stream bottle and then make it fizzy and then drink it out of another glass with ice.
I mean, it doesn't sound crazy. Because soft drinks taste different when they're cold as well.
Yeah.
Like you've been served a warm Coca-Cola. That's like, that'll ruin your day.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Just syrup. Like, it's just room temperature syrup. Like, ugh. But as I said, it's hot here. There's this whole thing about whether we're in a heat wave or not. I don't think we are, but the word is being bandied around quite a bit. And for the Americans listening, yes, it's not temperatures, but hot temperatures by as you know them.
But also, you can leave us alone because all of our houses are really old and they don't have air conditioning.
Not only that they don't have it, they're not built for it. You can't just put them in.
Yeah, no, you can't just retro. And to be honest with you, you can't get air conditioners in the UK because it's not really a thing. And then what you have to remember is that your houses are made of spit and timber. Ours are made of an outer envelopment of brick and then a bunch of breeze blocks and then insulation and then plaster to keep the cold out for the 362 days a year that it's fucking freezing.
Yeah.
And so on those 2 or 3 days every June where it gets really hot, we suffer.
Yeah. I get the Americans will see like our headlines being like 26 degrees might be a heat wave in the UK, and they're like 26 degrees. That's like 1 degree an hour Celsius or Fahrenheit, whichever is the what way. And it's like, yeah, it's different. Like, we're not used to it. It's never hot in England. And then when it is, it's pandemonium.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Unlike in America, they get like these deathly heat waves. It's suddenly like, well, you're allowed one water break while you're working on the roof. But that's it. One ice cube. That's it.
Yeah.
Whereas we have people who will just stop working if it gets too hot.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
But as you tried to. but then I busted that union very quickly.
No, I didn't try and stop working.
No.
I just came to you with my cap in my hands and went, Governor, can we please maybe have a window open while we make our podcast today? And you were like, no, Fagin, go and round up more children.
I threw hot coals at you
Yeah.
to be like, this is what you get for even asking, and tell the others. And you went, what others? And I went, shut up.
Yeah, that's exactly how it all went down.
All right, we're just amusing ourselves at this point, which is the podcast if this is your first time listening.
It's kind of the point of it.
Yeah. And one thing to get across as well is I saw, because I looked into a bag of an area of the podcast, which I don't check out very often, which is our Spotify analytics and all that bollocks.
Yes.
Which only because out of curiosity, I looked at a par and realized we'd had a message left on one of the Spotify episodes.
Aww.
And I didn't even know. It's from like several episodes back. It's from the Ultimate Spider-Man episode. And it's from a Michael Blackwood who asks, okay, big question. If Batman and Captain America get the same amount of prep time, who is winning? No weapons or bat belt. No weapons or bat belt bullshit. Sounds like the preparing bat belt bullshit, like Ron Burgundy thing.
Yeah.
Just fisticuffs.
Cap.
Well, this is the thing. If it's just fisticuffs, yeah, it's got to be Cap, isn't it? Because even with prep time, Batman's prep time is intrinsically tied to his bat belt. But also, I feel like removing the bat belt is kind of inherently unfair. Because
then he's just a rich guy with an affinity for bats
and martial arts.
Yeah, but Cap is a super soldier.
Yes, and this is what I'm saying though. But like by allowing Cap to have his super soldier serum stuff, then Batman's kind of got to have his power, which is his gadgets.
Yeah, so I suppose there's two answers to this. If we can't unenhance Steve Rogers to make him Steve Rogers again and not just Cap, then Batman's got it.
Yeah.
If it's skinny Steve Rogers from the start
I could be up skinny Steve Rogers. Like,
right, I'm getting Chris Evans around here.
He's not skinny. That's the problem.
Chris Evans could skinny himself to fight you.
Yeah, but not that level. Have you seen the film?
Yeah, I'm aware of the film, Ryan. I have a comic book podcast.
He could not get to that. I don't think he's already 6 foot something, so he couldn't get like, I don't know, maybe he could thin himself down like Christian Bale machinist style. But even then, he still got tall, like he still got, height on us.
Yeah.
I assume. But in this specific scenario, which this person's written in with, yeah, I'll give it to Cap, obviously, because he's super soldier and Batman's not. But you've got to bear in mind, it's not going to be like a wash, because Batman also does fight like bloody, Killer Croc, Clayface, bloody Bane. Like, yeah, he's got the gadgets, but it's not like the gadgets win every time. Like, he's doing, he's busting and moving, and he's dodging and he's weaving, I
think we should write to DC and Marvel and make it happen.
It probably has happened. I think...
What was the name of the person who wrote it again?
Michael Blackwood.
Michael Blackwood, can you redirect your query to Marvel and DC and let us know how it goes?
And be the thing that joins them together. Although they have crossed over before. There has been Avengers, Justice League stuff in the past. I think Batman and Captain America, everyone else got into that, misconception where they all start fighting. I think Batman and Cap were the two that were, or maybe it was Cap and Superman.
It would be Cap and Superman.
Yeah, I think they were the ones that were like, all right, everyone calm down. Like, let's talk it out. Let's see, and turns out, we're both superheroes. It's like, oh, that's crazy. So, yeah, thought I'd touch on that. And now...
Shazam.
Now we are Shazamming straight into Shazam. It's Shazam week. I've decreed now.
It's Shazception.
Shazception, yep. We're not recording on a Saturday, but... or
Sunday. A Shazunday.
Yes, a Shazunday, as some call it. But yeah, Shazam, we are doing it. It's the 2023 issue series, so it started in 2023, crossed over into 2024, so we can include it in the end of year roundup.
Because you made me read an extra 2 issues.
Yeah, I was like, get here so we can actually talk about it at the end of the year. And I think, to be fair, it's a good one to include, because it'll be interesting for the superhero discussion at the end of the year.
The comic's fine.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed a lot of it. I definitely wouldn't put in my best of, but it was fun and I think interesting to talk about.
No, it's going to be one of those episodes.
What, where we just talk about the good parts and the bad parts?
Yeah.
Yeah, fair.
And the middest of it all.
To be fair, I didn't pick up on a lot of bad parts, so I'd be interested to see if you've got those. If you've got some bad points, I'd be interested to go over them with you.
Well, let's start with
the credits.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, let's do that bit.
So the credits are, I thought this was very interesting.
You're like one of the dinosaurs in the comic.
The auditors.
Yeah, the auditors. You're just like, no, Jamie, we can't have fun until we've done our admin.
And you are the Joker of the podcast, always trying to derailing.
Absolutely.
I'm the Batman to your Joker. I'm the law and order, and you're the chaos.
One of my friends has been listening recently, and they
How
don't
dare
know,
they?
and they don't know you.
Right.
And so I was like, what impressions do you get of us from listening to the podcast? And their response was beautiful. They just said, I really get a sense that Ryan spends a lot of time reining you in.
Yeah.
Which I really enjoyed.
Telling no lies is all I can say. Credits. What was interesting about this, because I actually noticed this, and I suspect you didn't.
Change of artist in issue 7?
No. That I did notice, and I figured you were going to be right on that. Now, what I liked was in the credits, the credits have Mark Waid, who is the writer, and Dan Mora, who is the penciler, illustrator. They are both credited as storytellers.
Oh, so they wrote it.
Well, I think what it is I think it's just illustrating the collaboration that happened on the story between the writer and artist, because obviously the artist was doing out the panels and like arranging it and stuff. And obviously by that, I would assume they had a strong influence on how the story played out as well. So I thought that was interesting, as opposed to what we normally see, which is written by, drawn by, colored by. But we also do have colors by Alejandro Sánchez and letters by Troy Pateri. Again, the importance of lettering, it's still debated today.
The lettering was fine, I think. Yeah, the lettering was okay.
I only noticed the lettering when there's a very strict, sharp change for certain characters. Yeah. If that makes sense.
As I've noted before, a friend of mine is a typesetter, and he's taught me a bit about it. And so if like kerning's off and stuff, I will notice.
Right.
But everything was fine here.
Yeah. The wildest credits note I think we ever I ever had was when there was that one issue, which I can't even remember what the comic was, but they credited the flatterer.
Yes.
And then went into a deep dive on what a flatterer does.
Yeah.
And but this is like the second most interesting one. It's like, oh, they're both the storytellers. How quaint. So
how quaint.
So to be as patronizing as how quaint.
Oh, honey, sweetie, darling.
Good on you.
So you go.
Now we've done with the credits. We've credited the creditees.
So we're starting with the arting, and we're gonna talk about art as we do every episode. So
we've got some big words for the art.
No, not really.
Okay.
But this is a trend that I've noticed recently. This has been happening a lot recently, where I will really like the art at the start of a run, and then for no explicable reason, they'll change artist, and it sort of isn't as good. So the art in issue 7 and 8 for me wasn't as crisp. It definitely... So the first 6 issues were very much in that DC house style.
Yep.
If I'm honest with you. So no complaints there. It all looks fine. There was minimal jank, I think. I think it all looked pretty crisp.
A little, I don't know what you call it. It's not quite chibi, but there was a little bit of like fun faces, if that makes sense. They were like went against the normal style. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a surprised face was a bit like cartoony.
Yeah.
And I was like, I like that. Like that fits this kind of style.
But then issues 7 and 8 went into a more traditional comic book style.
Went to like a proper bright coloured 50s, 60s kind of look.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And everything became a bit more simple. Because one of the things that I've noticed about the DC house style in the past few years of the stuff that we've been reading is that a lot of it is quite intricate and quite detailed. More so than what's coming out of Marvel right now, I would argue. There's quite a lot of close-ups of really detailed facial expressions, and there's faces that take up entire panels, which means that you have to render a lot of detail into those faces if you're getting that close to them.
I think, to be said, there's if anyone were to check, there's probably those Marvel artists who are doing that. But I know the house style is different across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The DC house style is towards being slightly more detailed, I think, I would argue.
It goes for a little kind of grittier kind of drawing. Even if the colours might be a bit more vibrant and colourful like this, or a bit more muted like in other stuff.
And it's weird because DC for me is at once both more detailed and a bit more campy.
Yeah, more heroes with capes, and capes are inherently campy, aren't they?
But then issue 7 and 8 took on a, as you say,
throwback style.
Yeah, it was closer to that kind of golden age style, wasn't it?
Yes, and there's a whole thing which I will get into after the art, between the art and the story of this character, the history of this character,
right?
Which is more just interesting kind of tidbit stuff, and it kind of informs that style. I did think the larger panels, there was like some big panels of like heroism, which were like using the large panels, not quite splash panels, but just large panels on a page were quite
There weren't
good.
any splash panels in this, were there?
No, but that's what I mean. Just large panels, and then might have like a 2 or 3 kind of under that. But there's some big panels where you see Shazam's big old muscles, and it's just like, and he's saving a baby or whatever, and it's just like, yeah, he's cool, and he's got that real Superman-esque vibe.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is it, isn't it? Like, and all of the villains in this look a bit Shazam-y, a bit Superman-y.
Yep, definitely.
Because you've got, well, I mean, we meet a what is it, Bizarro version of.
Yeah, not properly, but kind of, yeah.
It's a kind of a Bizarro version, and then Black Adam is basically just
Shazam, basically, yeah.
Yeah, grittier version.
He's that classic, it's the same powers as the hero kind of.
Yeah, Flash
kind of villain,
and Reverse Flash.
Yes, which this was like a more of a trend, like when these heroes were kind of starting.
Yeah.
Because that becomes like they loved in those old like the golden age
Is
heroes.
Shazam Golden Age?
Yes, so again, I'll get into that because there's a whole thing with that. But yeah, I think they liked that, like, oh, it's like a mirror of the hero kind of thing. And
Yeah.
they like reflecting, like it's like the evil version of the hero. Which was kind of lazy because I you had Batman and Superman, and they had like Joker and Lex Luthor as their main villains. Whether they were in the Golden Age or not, I don't know for sure. Because I know Joker didn't come into like a bit later in Batman's run.
No, but Batman starts Silver Age, doesn't he?
No, Batman's like first. He's like 39. Like Batman's like he was only.
I thought Golden Age was like 50s, 60s.
If you're putting a definition on it, but the problem is like Golden Era being the first, it kind of inherently has to start when comics started.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. Maybe some people might argue that the Golden Era didn't really start till X year, and it's like, okay, what do you call that came before that? Like the Darkened Ages, where
We
no
should
one
probably know these things.
yeah. But also as a part of the joy of the learning, isn't it? Like you're learning along with us as we learn.
Yeah.
Look, I did some research. I just didn't do it on that topic. I'll get into my research.
Yeah, what was your research?
So my research was on the character, the history of the character Shazam, right?
Yeah.
Because the character wasn't always known as Shazam. Character had actually started with a different name. Do you have any inclination, or do you want to guess what that name was?
The Captain?
Close. The character's name. Can you make a guess? You think why they had to change it?
Was he Captain Marvel?
He was Captain Marvel.
Yeah, I did know this.
Gold Star.
And then
I can put in the Mario coin noise when you get that.
Bing.
Yeah.
And then
I've made extra work for myself.
because his sister is
oh god,
something Marvel, isn't she?
Mandy Marvel or something.
An M name, an alliterative M name,
Something like
which
that.
had to have been a pop at DC. It had to have been a pop at Marvel.
No, I think that's just a reference to his original name. I think that's just a self-reference.
So calling her Marvel is a self-referential thing, but giving her an alliterative name, that's so Stan Lee.
Yeah, I guess. It could be interpreted that way. I guess I don't really say that because, those kind of names are a very Stan Lee thing, but it's also like, it's not like you don't see it anywhere else. And also,
you don't see it anywhere near as much in DC.
Not as much. Also, it just rings kind of, always, like, the reason it worked for Stan Lee is because it makes the names more memorable, doesn't it? The most egregious use was the big dragon character for Marvel, which he called Fing Fang Foom.
Yeah. I always like Bruce Banner's name.
His name originally was David Banner.
Oh.
For the first couple of issues, he was David Banner, and then they changed it to Bruce Banner. And then eventually, I don't know this for sure, I think, like, fans were like, hang on, what's his name, David? And then it started to be like, oh yeah, his full name's David, but his middle name was Bruce, and he goes by Bruce.
Which isn't the weirdest thing in the world.
No, it's a surprisingly realistic take for, like, a Marvel character. It's like, oh yeah, he goes by his middle name. Like, oh, that mate. He's not a clone from another dimension, or he's time traveled back and changed his name or whatever.
Do you know, I had a great uncle called Billy, and I didn't find out until his funeral that his name was actually Stuart.
That's a stretch. That's a weird one.
Genuinely.
Yeah.
It was at his funeral that they were talking about the Stuart, and I poked my dad and I was like, Dad, are we not at Uncle Billy's funeral?
Are we at the wrong funeral?
Yeah, and he was like, no, I'll explain later.
So, Shazam, or originally Captain Marvel, actually started in the 40s, I believe. Basically, like, around the time of, 1940, so like a year after Batman and Superman started.
Yeah.
But he started with Fawcett Comics. So this was back when, like, Marvel was Time or Timely Comics, and DC was something else.
Hence the name change, because Marvel wasn't even Marvel at the time.
This is why he was just called Captain Marvel, and no one, gave a shit. So what happened was, it's an interesting kind of ironic story. So he was happening. Captain Marvel was Captain Marveling along the same time the Superman was Supermaning, right?
Yeah.
And then DC, or they probably weren't even DC at the time, but what would become DC were like, hey, we think you ripped us off. Because you would look at Superman and Captain Marvel together, they look pretty similar and they do similar stuff. So because of the lawsuit, they I don't know if they lost the lawsuit or just the fact that they were fighting it, but Forza Comics had to shut down. So they stopped production. So they stopped making Captain Marvel in about 52. So no Captain Marvel after that. Some years time later, Timely Comics became Marvel Comics. And then sometime later after that, Marvel Comics were like, we should have a Captain Marvel. Like they used to use that name. They don't use it anymore. We should have one. So they made a character kind of in a haste just to call them Captain Marvel, which was the original, was it Kree name character? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was the alien guy who then had Ms. Marvel, Carol Danvers, as his kind of sidekick who then took on the mantle. And originally, I don't know if this is interesting tidbit or not, but the original Marvel Captain Marvel, Marvel, that was his name. That was his creed. Marvel, that's why he became Captain Marvel.
Right.
He actually died. The character died of cancer.
Oh,
and they made it like a proper deep, like, he had like a deathbed and like all the heroes were like around his deathbed and like he didn't have that and he died and basically never came back. Like he's one of the superheroes who died and stayed dead. I don't know why they did it, but it's interesting. It's not one of those things where you think, yeah, that's automatically a good idea, but also it's not a bad idea. Like it's a really interesting, it was a powerful thing. So yeah, then years later after that, DC had bought Forza Comics, Fausa, I don't know how to say that properly, and they had the character, so like we can use the character, but then obviously as soon as they started using the character, Marvel were like, we own the name Captain Marvel, you can't use that anymore. So then they went, well, what else can we call him? And they went, well, everyone thinks of him as Shazam, because that's the word he says to get his powers. So we'll call him Shazam. But then the problem, as they address in this comic, is you can't call the character, his name can't be
a word he can't say
that makes a thing happen in himself. So yeah, and it's literally only with this recent comic that they've gone by the Captain now. As a like last minute kind of like, well, maybe if we just call him Captain then that'll be fine.
I like the Captain.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a weird one because like, how do you name a character? Like if a superhero existed in real life, like what do you call them? Especially if there's other heroes already exist.
Do you know what's really fun? The bloke who invented the Shaffordable thing in that guitar channel that I watch is the Captain.
Is also the Captain.
He's the Captain, yeah. He's Captain Lee.
So it's not an uncommon, like,
a little
nickname.
part of me hopes that this podcast makes it to Captain Lee. We should send it to him. Just be like, we talked about you on a comic book podcast. Can Jamie have a guitar?
I was going to say, it didn't make it to Alan Moore, but maybe it'll make it to this other person.
He runs Anderton's, which is a big guitar shop. And so, you know, if this podcast makes it all the way to him, Silver Sky, please, Lee, that would be great. I'd love that. If I could just, Silver Sky, American made in dragon fruit, that would be lovely.
And you said you didn't like call to actions, but that was a very call to action, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just
really subtle call to action.
I don't know that it was subtle, bud.
Well, it was certainly synergy-esque.
We promoted your guitar shop on a podcast that gets many listeners.
I know when I want to watch guitar-related content, I go to
Anderton's TV.
Exactly.
To watch Captain and Danish Pete.
And if you're listening, you should too.
Thank you. That was a great ad read.
This was not paid for.
No, nobody pays us.
I don't know why we did this.
So the story.
Yeah, getting into the story. Some general non-spoiler stuff, which I think I can take the reign on before giving you the full unleashed spoilerific talking points, yeah?
Part of me just wanted to drop a spoiler there and then.
Because I think, well, you bear in mind, I am the master of our domain. I would have said it out.
Don't call yourself the master of art. That's the most wanky thing you've ever said.
Okay, call me God Emperor.
Worse. Moon Emperor. Yeah, I got one in.
Fine, all right. Moon it is. I'll take the moon. So the one thing I want to say, which is to add a time code for a non-spoiler area, is generally it's light and fun. It's Shazam. Like, it is what you expect from this kind of thing. I do like that it has this kind of sense of realism and amongst the surrealness of the whole, setting and everything, like prime example, there's a tiger butler or something, and I had no idea what that was about, and I just went, okay, that's the style.
Do you remember? We were reading another DC comic, and there was a panel that showed the Shazam kids, and I was like, Ryan, why is there a tiger?
That was Flashpoint.
Yeah, right. So we were reading Flashpoint, and there was a panel that showed the Shazam kids, and I was like, Ryan, why is there a fucking tiger? And you were like, I don't know, mate.
No idea.
Now we know why there's a tiger, and
I still would say we don't know. We just have some experience with these kids having a tiger. This is a very different tiger.
It's a talking tiger butler.
It's a talking tiger butler that wears a suit.
So,
and is not eating the children.
I'm going to be honest with you. One of the things that I've noticed, particularly when we were reading like the Nightwing Dick Grayson stuff and the Poison Ivy stuff, is that DC Comics sort of seem to be geared to a more mature, like adolescent audience at the moment. Whereas
the titles we've read, absolutely.
Yeah. So from the dip test that we've done into modern DC, they deal with some quite adult themes and are a bit more adult. This is definitely a comic book for kids.
Yeah, I definitely more geared that way. And again, when you have kids but turning into superheroes, I think that is naturally where it's going to go.
Yeah, I suppose it is, isn't it?
I think it'd have a weird vibe if you had like a really adult, like an Invincible, but it was a child turning into an adult superhero, because you'd get into some really messy areas there. I think, what's that whole 13 going on 30 thing?
Yeah,
where people are like, there was some stuff in there that was not great.
There was some stuff in here that wasn't great.
No, but that had a very good joke in it, which you definitely spotted as well. So before we get into spoilers, I would say one thing I liked about it, to anyone who's listening who hasn't read it and is considering reading it, the first arc, which is kind of first 6 issues, that what I liked about it is you had this surface level story that is like Shazam just doing Shazam stuff, like typical superhero shenanigans storyline stuff. Like there's dinosaurs from space that have this storyline, and then there's just like saving the day kind of cat, like not literally, but like rescuing a cat from a tree kind of stuff, and just superhero being superhero stuff. And if it was just that, I would have been like, this is just a mid superhero comic. But you have the kind of deeper subplot, which I thought slowly came in at a nice pace, and then culminated with the end of that first arc.
I would argue that was the plot, and the subplot was the dinosaur stuff.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. So, but because how it first started, the subplot was the big surface level stuff.
Yeah.
And then the real plot was like the beneath the surface slowly creeping in. And then slowly the subplot and the main plot kind of converge. And then the real plot is revealed to be the subplot the whole time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I thought they hinted at it early in good ways. Like something happens and you go, and literally there were points where, and we'll get into the spoilers, but there were points where something happened. I went, I did not expect that to happen. Like of all the things that could have happened on the last page of this issue, I would never have guessed it was that. And then I was like, I want to see what happens next, which again, just inherently made it interesting.
It was readable, wasn't it? I didn't hate reading it. I didn't like it, but I didn't hate reading it.
But that's interesting. Because again, that gives us more of like the what worked, what didn't work. Like you said before about like, oh, it's easy to talk about the great stuff or the hot or the really shitty stuff. Like those are the easy ones to talk
Remember
about.
last week we had that comic book that was a really kind of shit story that was really well told.
Yeah.
This was sort of a mid story that was quite well told.
Yes. Yeah.
Like the storytelling devices were in place, weren't they?
Yeah.
And again, I do love a subplot. I like the quiet intrigue of a subplot.
Yeah. I like that.
And they tied together quite nicely. The subplot and the main plot did tie together quite nicely.
Yeah. I like how, because normally that subplot that becomes the main plot in every other big 2 comic story, it normally is the first issue ends, whatever's happened. Maybe there's a hint of like you wait till they get here. Oh, the big boss who's really in charge, blah, blah, blah. And then the last scene is them watching the hero on some cameras. And they're like, soon I will make my move. And literally, I've read that 100 times. Like that played out pretty much. This did the same basic thing, but in a way more interesting way.
I mean, so a hero being controlled by bad guys is a pretty standard comic book idea at this point, isn't it?
But even that normally that's used for like big two fight, like, oh, not big two, but like heroes fighting. So, you know, the whole thing we said earlier about like, you know, who would win in a fight, blah, blah, blah. The whole thing about Batman, Superman is it's normally who's being controlled by a villain or what is the misconception there's the reason they're fighting for. This was more of a story about the hero themselves. There wasn't any kind of like, and now you're going to fight Batman and there's going to be a misconception, but then you work it out and then you team up. Like there wasn't none of that.
Yes, okay.
It was a more personal, like, who are you as a hero kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's as much as non-spoiler stuff. One thing I forgot to mention, the arting, which I thought you'd appreciate if you didn't notice it. There was a part where, and this is talking about control and the difference between the Billy Batson character and the Captain character, who have always been one and the same, like just literally same person, different body, essentially. Yeah. It starts to address like possible differences between these two. There's a bit where the character's being controlled and you have the narration, but the thought bubbles or narration bubbles.
It changes.
The color change in one of the boxes. And little thing like that, which again, overall, I wasn't in love with the comic. I wouldn't even say great, but I thought there were good parts that made it interesting. That for me was like a little bit of like I really appreciate the attention to detail there. Storytelling through visual medium. So
it did a lot of the things I don't like.
Are we getting spoilers?
No, well, no, this is just, a general observation.
Right.
There was a lot of fourth wall breaky, the writer imprinting themselves and explaining what happened in previous issues and giving context.
Yeah.
Which I understand. It's a serialized comic, which we've established is meant for kids and not adults with disposable income. And so it's not inconceivable that a kid's parent would have gone, "Oh, you've been good today, pick a comic."
Yeah.
And I think DC are creating this with the expectation that it's not being read consistently by somebody with disposable income. And so I get it. They want to make that reading experience as pleasant as they can. Yeah. And so when something happens that you need context for, they pop a little box in. And it was PK who kept doing it. Somebody with the initials PK.
Might be an editor or something.
Yeah, potentially.
Let me have a look. You keep talking.
But they were, and to be honest with you, that bothers me. It always has done. I don't like that kind of thing. And again, we have this thing that happens in comic books a lot where we get a pretty consistent narration by the protagonist, which again is an egregious comic book trope for me. I just don't like it.
That would be a Paul Kaminsky. Cool. That's the person leaving the note. So thanks, Paul, for your help.
Yeah, so there was a lot of notes from Paul Kaminsky about things that had happened, but they were referencing stuff that happened like an issue ago. And for me, it's just like, I can see why they would feel the need for it, given the context of the comic. My initial observation of it was that, this is probably for a younger reader. And so, it's not inconceivable that they wouldn't have access to all the issues in the same way that an adult collector would. And so I can appreciate that. But overall, I think it spoils the experience.
Yeah. I think I'm going to nick something from a podcast I listen to, but I think it's going to...
Let's not plagiarize, for fuck's sake.
It's a concept. You can't... Look, it's people who try to copyright React. Like, it's a concept.
We just made a pitch for paid promotion by Andertons. We can't then plagiarize other people's...
They're going to know we steal all of our ideas.
Exactly. So you're not allowed.
People don't realize there's another comic book podcast and we just do the same comic they do every week, but no one knows what the original one is.
It's called the Comic Stan podcast.
It's called the Literal Comic Podcast.
Called the Literal Graphic Novel Podcast.
It's called the Alamo Appreciation Society. So what I'm pulling... I think you'll like this because I think this kind of will actually...
No, I've prejudged and I already hate it.
All right. I mean... That's comic book fans in a nutshell, so fair enough. There's a podcast list here where they talk about when you look at when you're in a genre of something, but there's one way that it's done by one section, and then there's a different way done by another section, right? And if you like one way, you're just inherently not going to like the other way. Or not even not like, but the way they describe it is, for one way, this is the way where it could be the best possible version. For the other way... This was a wrestling podcast. I'm trying to do it in non-wrestling terms. In the other way, they describe it as it could never be a 10 for you. So it could be great. It could be its best possible version. But because the inherent style does certain things like narration and calling back to previous issues and that kind of stuff, it could be its best possible self. But for you personally, it can never be a 10 out of 10. And I think that's a good way to look at it. You can assess it on its own merits. But you acknowledge that because it inherently does these things and it's never going to stop doing them, it will never be a perfect for you.
Yeah, but I don't think that invalidates me pointing it out.
No. That's what I mean. It's like it's still worth mentioning because you're still explaining why it's not perfect for you. But then once you've done that, then you can look into like how is this max 8 out of 10? Where does it rank?
And
there?
again, I'm not against an authorial aside. Like I love Pratchett, and Pratchett's full of authorial asides.
But this is very blatantly the reason for it is just like, hey, just so you know, this happened last issue. It's not like added context that wasn't there previously or that kind of stuff.
Or jokes and funny moments and, charming little asides that the author pops in. And, Pratchett does that really well. Douglas Adams does that really well. They both did that really well. That's sad. But yeah, I just find the use of it in comic books to be a bit passé. And again, the narration by the protagonist, it just screams of being told things and not shown them.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's definitely like a simplified version of getting across exposition.
Yeah,
like it's just in the character's head, and that's why like we've done comics where they've done interesting versions of this. Like the one we always come back to is Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, where it's the third party, or it's the other character who is retroactively writing about all the events as they've happened.
Yes, and that's interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
Because that then becomes this really present narrative device. And again, obviously in literature, you get the omniscient third-person narrator. Do you know what an omniscient third-person narrator is?
I get like just everything's being described as like from none of the characters within it. It's been like objectively described.
Yeah. An omniscient third-person narrator is in the heads of all the characters and they're narrating.
Yeah, it's all he, she, they, that they all, everyone is those. Like everyone is the third person from the narrator.
Yes, but also an omniscient third person narrator can describe everyone's thoughts.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
A really great example of that kind of narration is the Game of Thrones books, the Song of Ice and Fire books, where he chooses a different narrative perspective every chapter. And so the narrator's kind of inside a bunch of, even though they're using first person narration, they're inside a bunch of characters' heads.
Great comic book example of that was Nice House by the Lake, where every issue was a character's issue. So it was from their perspective. And
that's a really similar narrative device. But when you've got this strong first person narration, which is what we have here. And then you just sort of, I suppose it's, if I was reading a novel that had a first person narrator and they were telling me their thoughts, it wouldn't bother me. I think it's just because I'm seeing it over the top of the art and I'm like, you could just show me.
Yeah.
And so maybe it shouldn't annoy me as much as it does. And maybe, when we get to a comic that does a really bad job of not using it, I might change my mind on it. But as it stands, I just find it to be a little bit oversimple and a bit overused, possibly.
Yeah, it's still a worthy critique. Like you can still say it marks it down. For the reason, but like you said earlier, is this aimed at kids? It seems like it is, and I've generally had this same kind of thinking. I've been watching a bit of the new Doctor Who series, just to see what it's like.
Shooty Gatwa, what a guy!
Yep, he's an entertainer, like at heart, like. And seeing these new episodes, I'm kind of trying to gather, like, I'm generally trying to decide, do I like them or not?
Yeah.
And there's, like with these comics, there's bits I really like, and there's bits that really annoy me. So I'm like, am I right to judge it on these annoying parts when, if this show is for kids, which it seems like it is it fair to judge on those same kind of points?
Yeah. And you're not a true Whovian, are you?
I mean, I've seen quite a bit. Like, it's like with Star Wars, we've had the thing, if you haven't noticed before, it's like, we don't consider ourselves Star Wars fans, but we've seen all the films and the TV shows, and we've read some comics, and I've played a lot of the games, and you've read a novel or something.
Yeah.
And then it's like, are we fans?
Yeah,
like,
this
are we
is
actually
it.
just fans?
And like, I won't flick away from a piece of YouTube content that's like, oh, by the way, this Jedi used a different lightsaber fencing style. And I'm like, cool.
Yeah.
That sounds great. I want to know everything I can know about kyber crystals and lightsaber jewels and
the fact that we know about kyber crystals, but then if someone else, who wasn't in it, was like, "Oh, are you a Star Wars fan?" We couldn't help but be like, "Well, not really." Like,
and then I'm like, "Oh, but Kylo Ren's lightsaber was so sketchy because he was using an artificial kyber crystal that he had to make himself, and that's why his saber misfires all the time."
And I'm like, and the white lightsabers are interesting because they are actually non-affiliated with the Jedi. So
and the purple lightsabers are different, and the green ones are for more force sensitive people, and the blue ones are for people who are more interested in dueling. And it's like, oh fuck, we're Star Wars there.
Exactly. So So yeah, I like Doctor Who. Like I watched, I mean, back in the bloody Christopher Eccleston days, like best Doctor in my opinion. You know, the
Matt
fact that I
Smith for
have a
me.
favorite Doctor.
Matt Smith for me.
Matt Smith was great.
But I just like Matt Smith though.
Oh yeah, he's great. He's great in House of the Dragon.
He's fantastic in The Crown.
And he was the best part of Morbius. One day we're going to have to watch Morbius and make some content about it.
Yeah, well, it can be on the YouTube channel. Though.
Yeah,
Let's
considering
not spend
how
an
much-
hour and a half talking about it.
Considering how much I've ripped into it
Yeah, this is it.
and just told you how bad it is.
So it's time for the theme song.
Spoilers,
The theme song that we always do for this, which is
which I'll let you take this time.
yeah, absolutely. It's what do we call it? Plot overviews with Jamie.
Yeah,
So
the one we always do.
the one we always do.
Yeah.
So the general plot of this comic book is that it opens with the subplot of the dinosaurs, which is fun, and then we discover that something unusual is happening with the magic that creates Shazam, which has meant that he can't share the powers with his siblings.
There's a big crossover event, and it's related to that.
Oh,
and-
is that what it
Yeah,
is?
it was a
You're
cross-
interrupting the overview. I willingly did the overview.
You always do every episode.
No, I'm always resistant. This week I was like, do you know what? I'm going to give Ryan a treat, and I'm not going to play up. And I'm just going to, I'm going to be nice, and I'm going to do the overview. And then you interrupted me.
Okay,
Now
will
I'm
let
not,
you go.
Now I'm not ever doing it again. And so we then see Shazam doing normal superhero stuff. And his character starts to become overly reckless and aggressive. And it transpires that the gods that he draws his power from are taking it in turns to control him so that they can better exert their influence over the human sphere. He becomes very scared of his powers at points, decides to stop using them, flies to the moon with some apes, fights the Moon Emperor. See, the
Yeah.
spoiler I snuck in earlier.
Yeah.
And then with the help of his siblings, because friendship, Ryan, is magic.
Friendship beats out every time.
Absolutely.
With the power of friendship.
With the power of siblinghood friendship, he's able to convince the gods to let him execute his powers in any way that he sees fit. And then he flies home and fights Black Adam for no good reason.
Well, there's reasons. It happens. Like there's a
He ruins his own house.
which was a great bit. because
It was my favorite bit of the whole thing.
the impact of it, yeah. Do you remember off the top of your head, can you recall the gods that give him the powers?
Yes, I can. So S is for Solomon,
Yep.
H is-
who gives?
wisdom.
Yep.
Hercules
Yep.
gives strength.
Yep.
A is for don't tell me. I'll get to the first A, the A's in a minute. Z is Zeus.
Yep. Who
Um,
gives?
The thunder, the lightning.
Yes. I'll give it. It says here power. I
Yeah.
think that's a really vague term, but yeah, thunder.
So
essentially.
Hercules gives him his strength,
Mm-hmm.
and then Mercury gives him his speed.
Yep.
And the two A's.
I would not get these. Like, if I hadn't just read this, I would not get these.
So I'm gonna say
they're
they're not all Greek gods, so it can't be Apollo
no.
because he's one of the Romanized Greek gods, isn't he?
Do you want me to give you the powers or the aspects? that they give?
Yeah.
So the first A is stamina.
Oh, which he gets from. No, it's gone.
Someone who is holding things long time.
Yeah, no, I know it. I just can't think of the name.
It's Atlas.
Atlas, of
Yes.
course it is. Yeah, Atlas.
And the other A he gets courage from.
Oh yeah, it's the courage. Oh no, it's gone.
It's the courage of someone who is quite invulnerable, but not completely.
Achilles.
Yes.
It's the courage of Achilles.
So I like all this god stuff because I literally did not click that it was the name. I knew he got powers from a bunch of gods.
Well, what's interesting is that Solomon isn't a god. So Solomon's
but
just...
they make reference of that as
Yeah.
well. And to be honest, having said about like, oh, I didn't love this comic, I did really like this whole story with the gods and everything. I don't think it's something they've done before. So just doing something new with a character that's been around since the fucking 40s, Like, I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, because originally he just got his power from a wizard, didn't he?
Oh, the powers are of the gods, but the wizard is like the dealer of the powers.
The conduit for it, yeah.
They loan their powers. What's the whole, like, the big short thing with, like, all the tranches and the pooling money? They pull their powers into a thing, and then they sell it to the wizard, and then the wizard sells it as a combined tranche of powers.
Like a bond?
To a kid, basically.
It's a mortgage bond.
Yeah, it's a mortgage bond, but with Greek god powers.
Yeah, so they're all AAA loans, baby.
Yes.
There's none of those awful B tier loans in there.
Triple B.
Triple B. One of the things that I found interesting about it is that generally, I mean, I don't know if the listener will know this, but I have a bit of an obsession with folklore and mythology.
If they've been listening long enough, they will, but new listeners might not.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, the Thor episode was a fairly clear indication of that, wasn't it? And to be honest with you, the Greco-Roman mythology isn't my favourite, and it's not my specialty. I know way more about, like Japanese yokai and the Polynesian mythologies and the Norse mythology. However, I know enough about the Greek mythology to know that the negative aspects of these gods, their flaws, are all pretty nailed on. Like, representing Zeus as egotistical is so nailed on to the Greek stories and the things that Zeus does. And then, it was interesting, wasn't it? And I think often, well, certainly the way that Marvel has treated the Norse mythology with the Thor and Loki stuff, they play pretty free and loose with it. And it's so interesting because people will try and talk Norse mythology with me and they'll disagree with me on some finer point of it. And I will instantly know that they've learned all of their Norse mythology knowledge from Marvel as opposed to actually just reading the prose edda.
Like when we first discussed Greek mythology.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're like, oh, Loki isn't Thor's brother. And I'm like, no, very different parentage. But here they've dealt with it quite sensitively. And I suppose it's interesting because even though Hellenism is a dead religion, it's still a religion.
Yeah, this seems to be one of those universes, and there's a bunch of them where the gods all existed, like all gods have all existed because of American Gods by Neil Gaiman?
Yes.
Kind of addressed this in a direct way.
The gods die when they stop being believed in.
They created through the power of belief, and then they not even stop existing, but just lose power when no one believes in them.
Which is absolutely the way it works, in a very real sense.
And also in a much more metaphorical sense.
Well, no, in a very real sense. So the idea that gods have power as long as people believe in them is true.
Yes, but
even though those gods don't actually exist in like a real way, the power of religion and the power of religious groups and movements is such because they're so big.
Yeah.
And so, the power of the Catholic Church is becoming less and less powerful internationally than it was in the medieval era because fewer and fewer people are as dedicated to it as they were. And the fact that no new religions are really popping up these days, I think, is an interesting part of our more secular, scientifically enlightened society. But, actually, that kind of meta conversation about story, I think, is really interesting because these stories do have power. And the stories that were told about these gods that were being presented were at one point people's very real understanding of the way that the world worked. I mean, we have a modern creation myth, right? The Big Bang Theory. But the Big Bang Theory is obviously hard science, but it's as much story as science. It's a piece of narrative science, isn't it?
There's for anyone listening, and if you haven't seen this as well, there's a comedian, Pete Holmes, who does like a great bit about that, which is also kind of a good thinker as well. He says he kind of refers to like how science is its own religion and its own god. And when people are like, well, no, because we don't believe in creationism, we believe in the Big Bang Theory. And he's like, okay, but then what did the Big Bang Theory come from? Like nothing. Like that's the theory, isn't it? It's like that there was nothing and then there was a Big Bang. And then it's like, where do you think you go when you die? Back to your god? Nothingness? Like
and this is it. And the Big Bang Theory is in at least in the narrative way that it's expressed is painfully close to all of the creation myths. And so the idea that these characters are like losing power as people stop believing in them is very real. It's a very real idea that affects the way that we as humans perceive ourselves and the world and our place in it. And so I think having a I hadn't even really considered this until I started talking about it, but it's almost a meta conversation about story and the power of story.
Yep. And it's interesting as well is typically in a kind of almost like elitism 1%er kind of view, the gods, they want this extra power. So the whole reason for them influencing Shazam and they're kind of momentarily taking control of Shazam is one, they're doing it one at a time because it's almost like a competition to see who can do it better, which is a very Greek gods thing, isn't it? Like, let's have a game with the mortals. But in this instance, their end goal is they want Shazam to more represent them because he's using their powers. They want him to represent them better, and therefore spread the word of them and for them to kind of gain more power. And to jump to the ending a little bit, because we are in the spoilers, what I do like is the way he defeats them. I mean, the one thing is I like the way they have a fight. All his brothers and sisters have got all magical artifacts from his Batcave, which they address in a very kind of kid way of like,
it's his closet.
Yeah, he's making his own Batcave with all this. You remember the whole thing about, was it the giant penny and the Tyrannosaurus Rex?
Yes.
And you were like, what is this? And I'm like, oh yeah, this has always happened.
And the irony of the fact that Shazam now has a dinosaur in his Batcave was not lost on me.
Yeah, exactly. And
did you hear that?
It probably came through. Yes.
Sorry, guys.
Might have been the ice cream.
I know I tasted the ice cream. So if you're listening to this in headphones, I'm very sorry.
But I like that they're having the fight, and then Heath and Shazam thinks, Billy even because he can't do the Shazam thing because he's being controlled. He goes, oh, Solomon's not fighting. Solomon's the wise one. Like, I'll go to him. And he asks for more wisdom to be able to resist control. And then with that extra wisdom, goes back to the gods and say, look, you controlling me is not going to do much for you guys. It's going to make people aware of me. But then they might be like, oh, where's his powers from? Oh, some gods. He's like, you guys need to be the ones out in the world doing good and making believers out of people.
That also really teed up something they'd been setting up for quite a while in those first 6 issues, which is something you mentioned earlier of the separation between the captain and Billy.
Yeah.
And Solomon made it very clear that he had noticed that and he'd started noticing them Billy and Shazam refer to each other in the third person as opposed to the first person. And he said, this is only going to widen that gap. You having access to all of my wisdom sometimes and not all of the time is only going to make you see the captain as a distinct person from you more often. And I thought that was quite interesting because they're clearly teeing up a later story arc with that.
Yeah. And you know what's great about that as well? There's a pet peeve I have with superhero stories where they'll have this arc and they'll build up this like impossible to escape from, cornering the protagonist and like, how are they going to get out of this one? And then they do something and then it just saves the day and it solves everything, right? And that is kind of a requirement of the serialized comic. Like they have to build up the odds and then they have to overcome them, and that's the story. But what good comics do is the way they beat it has some lingering after effect that they have to then deal with afterwards. So there's a price to be paid for how they fixed everything. And that's what I think was really good about this whole comic, is there was constantly like a domino effect of, you did this and it sorted everything, but now you got to deal with this. Like that's how you do these well, is you constantly, it's not just a fix that problem. Oh, and there's a new problem, like a completely separate new problem
that I need more power for, and that's where the power creep comes into it, isn't it?
Exactly. There's also, speaking of the wisdom, I loved, there was, again, these little parts that I really enjoyed, which overall, I enjoyed the whole comic. The little parts that helped it were, for example, him saying, why, like he addresses this kind of idea of, why don't you just stay as the superhero character? Like, why don't you just stay as the captain? Because you have all these powers and stuff. Like, why would you ever go back to being a kid at all? And he addresses it's because, and I think this is a reference to then later, he says, it's Solomon's wisdom. Because when I'm the captain, all I want to do as a kid is like eat ice cream and play video games and do all this. But Solomon's wisdom, because he has that power when he's the captain, the wisdom goes, maybe you shouldn't be wasting your time eating ice cream and playing video games. Maybe you should be like, making the most of your time and doing good stuff and stuff that will benefit you in the future. So it's kind of like, imagine having a superpowered version of yourself, but then there's a nagging voice that's like, don't just sit there and have fun. And you go, oh, I'll just be a kid again. Like,
yeah, totally. And to be honest with you, if I got the opportunity between being me and being a kid, I'd take being a kid for a bit.
Oh yeah, 100%. And that's kind of a good allegory for maturity and adulthood. It's you get that, you become that for yourself. If you're any kind of mature adult, you become that for yourself, where you go, yeah, maybe I can't just do all this cool stuff. There's the old joke about like how to scare a child. You go, one day you're going to have all the money and all the free time to do whatever you want, but you won't want to.
Yeah.
And like the kids are, ugh. And that is kind of here like a good allegory for being older and the responsibility of power and that kind of stuff, like into a look in a grand way. But I just like the writers have thought about like explaining one thing and having like a real interesting and the core to the character like reason for it not to be. So I'm trying to think what else of that big story. Again, I liked how they pass it out in little bits, like. The end of issue 1, he saves the day on this little kind of whatever incident it was, and he's in front of all the cameras and go, thanks, Captain, for helping us. And I'm like, I'm not even thinking of what's going to happen. I'm just kind of going through the motions as a stereotypical superhero story. And then he just starts going into, we don't know anything's wrong at all. And he just starts going into, you know what, you should all be bloody grateful because I've saved the day and I'm better than you and you got to bow down to me kind of thing. And then he just goes, what the hell did I say that for?
Yeah.
And issue 1 ends. And I'm like, that's really interesting.
Yeah, to be honest with you, that was what kept me in it, that moment in issue 1, because most of issue 1 was pretty paint by numbers.
Yes.
And so getting to that point, it was like, oh, okay, there's a wider story that's happening here. Something is happening. I mean, now that I've spoken about it, and now that I've talked about all the things that were happening, sorry, there's a very happy, sleepy dog who's kicking me, and that's adorable. Because I'm now getting into, actually collecting my thoughts on it, maybe I liked it more than I thought I did.
Well, this is what's interesting is when, like, it's kind of like a book club kind of thing for us, isn't it? Like, once you actually break it down, you go, actually, these parts were really good. But it is still important. I'm not going to be like, haha, you secretly liked it. But it's important, like, what is your immediate reaction to it? Because that's what they are aiming for. No one, I don't know. I mean, some, like, literary writers probably write things like you gotta read it like at least 5 times before you start understanding like the themes and the core and why it's so brilliant. Comics should not be like that. Like these comics should not be like that. They should be good off the bat.
Yeah.
If you're talking about more like a denser graphic novel, trade paperback sort of thing, I think that's where you have that room to go, oh yeah, there's a lot, it's dense and it's deeper and you have to kind of reread it a couple times maybe.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. And
this isn't Watchmen,
serialized comics are TV and like graphic novels are film.
Yes.
That's the difference, isn't it? That a serialized comic is designed to give you an hour's worth of story that you'll think about for a week and then come back to a week later. Whereas a film is designed to give you 2 to 3 hours of story that you're going to ruminate on for a long time.
Yes. And then even with that, with subcategories, you also have like prestige TV, which like, for my opinion, would be something like a Tom King series where it's ongoing, but it's a lot better written.
Basically HBO stuff.
Yes.
Like Golden Age of HBO, Sopranos, that kind of shit.
Exactly. Whereas this, I think it does feel more like a kid's show.
Yeah.
But I think it's got a little more under the surface, but that's not maybe immediately obvious to every reader.
And I really love children's, to go off the rails a bit here, I really love children's entertainment that does have that level of depth. Like, I know you've not seen it, but Steven Universe is a really fantastic example.
It's on my list.
Yeah.
My equal counter for that is Gravity Falls.
Yes, which
Similar
I didn't
kind of
like.
Really?
Weirdly. Yeah, I watched a couple of episodes because...
Oh, it takes a bit.
Yeah, because again, somebody said to me, "What, you're a Steven Universe fan?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm really attached to it." And they said, "Oh, watch Gravity Falls, you'll like it." And I watched a few episodes and was like, "Ah, this isn't for me." But one that we were both fans of, I think, is Adventure Time.
No, I haven't seen Adventure Time. No.
So the creator of Steven Universe was one of the staff writers on Adventure Time.
Yeah, that they seem to all like work with each other. Like Gravity Falls had like 8 shows spawn off of who worked on that. They all like created their own shows as well.
But Adventure Time was really good as well, and it was predominantly aimed at children. There, I mean, Steven Universe, I think the episodes are like 12 minutes long.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Gravity Falls, what is that? I think it starts at that, and then as the story kind of picks up and gets a little more dense, it becomes 20-minute, 25-minute episodes.
I mean, Steven Universe ended up making a feature film. Like, they made a full film out of it.
Gravity Falls, this isn't like me going back and this is me going like, oh yeah, well, but just like in the similarities they have, Gravity Falls has 3-ish episodes at the end, which you can kind of watch as a film almost. Like it's a 3-parter ending, but you can just watch it in one go. It's like a great film ending, if that makes sense.
But again, Gravity Falls and Steven Universe, both great examples, just one that one of us was a fan of and one that the other was a fan of. And
we've both got them on our lists to properly try.
Absolutely. And it's really fun when stuff that is predominantly aimed at a younger audience has that level of depth. I mean, it's the thing that made Disney so infinitely popular in the 90s.
Yes.
Is that there were these layers of depth and there were these adult jokes that crept in, particularly with the Pixar stuff, I suppose. Like, it was more noticeable in the Pixar stuff, wasn't it?
Adult by adult themes, we mean like more mature topics. It's hard to describe adult stuff when not talking about just sexual or violence.
Yeah.
Like, I've had this conversation before. Like, one great way to describe what I mean by adult stuff, I mean like the show Bob's Burgers.
Yeah.
That's adult, but not in the traditional, again, like 18 rated sex and violence.
When we say adult themes, it's just jokes that will be understood by adults and not their kids.
Yeah. The boring adult mundane stuff that they make jokes about.
And yeah, exactly. And I think that's way more interesting. Just what infinitely more interesting is media that sees me.
Yes.
You know.
Sees us for the boring people we are.
Well, our banal adult lives that we have to just sort of drudge through to have these moments of wonderful podcasting or whatever it is you do as a hobby, you know?
And yeah, that one show about podcasting starring Zach Braff apparently did not do well.
Did Zach Braff do a show about podcasting?
He played a guy who starts a podcast, but it was based on an actual podcast that started. Yeah, I think it's called Alex Inc. I think.
Right. Okay.
But I think people are like, we like listening to podcasts, but we don't care enough about the people who make the behind the scenes to watch a TV show about it.
Yeah, I mean I think podcasting probably has the least interesting behind the scenes because it is inherently just two or more people sitting in a room with some microphones.
Yes.
There's not very high production values here.
We don't speak outside of the podcast.
No, not at all. No. I mean, as we've established, we live in pods in a white room.
Yeah, with a two-way mirror.
Which
we assume is two-way.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know, but you feel like you're being watched.
It's weird given that we're sat in that room right now. I really struggle to remember how we described it.
Yeah. And what's also weird is whenever we try and address it, that's when normally they cut the feed and reset the podcast into something like, you know, when earlier when you were saying about describing the gods, I normally put that as like, when I describe something, I'll describe it as Ryan Badley describes whatever. Do you mind if I put, because I normally, for you, I just put, oh, Jamie talks about this or rants about this sometimes. Do you mind if I use the Badly explains term for you as well? Because I didn't want to put that in there and then you see it not realizing it's a thing and being like, is he taking the piss? Like,
I will have you know that a magistrate called me articulate and eloquent today.
Back in court again, were you?
Yeah. That's only funny to Ryan and I because we know what kind of work I do.
Serial killer.
Oh, fuck off.
I think I've said that before. People might start to notice a trend. There's one other little bit. I mean, I've got a bunch of little notes, which I'll do in my hold up way, you know. But the other big bit I thought was going to be bigger, and I liked when it happened, and then it turned into nothing, was the friend. I can't remember his name. He's the brother, essentially. He's the other kid. Freddie, yes. Better memory than me. Yes. When Freddie elects to take the powers, I thought I was going to be like, that's really interesting, because they'd been building that with the whole rest of the family not having the powers.
And Freddie also presenting as being disabled.
Yeah, he's always been, like, that's like staple of the character kind of thing.
Right, okay.
Yeah, he's one of those, like, doesn't let it get him down in the slightest, like.
But you can see how that power would be way more intoxicating for him than it would be for Billy.
Exactly.
And even Billy acknowledges that when he's Billy, he's heavy and slow and uncoordinated in comparison with being the captain.
Yes.
And so you know that disparity is even greater for Fred, isn't it?
Yeah. Unfortunately, soon after that, they reveal that it's a ploy to buy more time, which when that happened I went, well, that is still clever though. Like, it's still like Freddie knew the cavalry was coming and was like, well, we need to do something because they're gonna.
Also, I think we should just know, and I hadn't really considered it before, but fantastically human representation of not only a disabled person but a disabled child.
Yeah.
And you know,
and the foster family.
Yeah, and a big blended foster family. Yeah, and you know, quite close to my heart. And you don't see that in media very often, particularly, and so that was quite interesting to me because I had some context for that because I'd done a little bit of research off the back of that Flash comic.
Yeah.
Because we'd seen the Shazam kids and I was like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah.
But no, and when you think about it, actually, that's quite interesting, isn't it? That we have here a representation of disability, which is very quietly about disability and doesn't bring that, you know, it's really humanizing, I think.
I think it's
that it's not a central part of his character. It's just, this is Freddie. When you see him in a panel, he has a walking stick and that's just Freddie, right? That's not, you know, there's no like, oh no, Freddie, my brother who has XYZ disability. It's just Freddie.
Yeah. I think it's a good example of like how representation works best is when it's just not when it's done subtly, but when it becomes part of the story so intrinsically that the character is just a character. They're not an introduced, whatever representation of whatever minority that then some people react badly to because they feel they're shoehorned in, which is more evident with stuff like that when the writing is poor. Yeah. Like when writing is poor, then you can tell when it's like a studio has gone make it more diverse.
Yes.
But when it's well written, no one cares. And then, less people care. There's always assholes.
And this is a topic that's really, really close to my heart for reasons that you will know that the listener won't know. But seeing really like naturalistic representations of differently abled people in media just hits my heart in a special place.
Yeah.
Because, Freddie is no less human.
Yeah.
Freddie's no less human or no less capable. He's just Freddie, right? And that's the way that representation should happen. And I think if there was a time where in this run they wanted to show maybe some of the challenges that he faces, then that would be really interesting and that would really round out that character. And also, I think a more in-depth meditation on his relationship with his powers, if he ever gets them back, would be really fascinating. But whilst it isn't the central observation of the story, it was really nice to see it presented in such a thoughtful way.
Yeah. And like I say, when the character was first introduced, it might have been more of a big kind of like, a disabled character is now.
Well, I imagine if they introduced him in the 40s, they probably would have used some pretty grim verbiage.
Yeah, I don't think he was. I feel like the original one was just a kid who turned into a superhero in the same way that like the kid was around when crime happened, like Clark Kent was around. It's like, whoop, better go in the telephone box and turn into Superman.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's probably when he came back in the 90s. It was 95, I think they got the rights back to him. DC bought the rights to him. So probably around then. And even in the 90s, like there would have been, there could have and probably were.
There would have been slurs.
Yes.
There would have been words that are now considered slurs.
Yes. So I've got quite a few of my...
Do we have to do all of them?
I'll do the best ones.
It's really warm. Can we open a window?
We're almost done. We're running. We are cutting short.
It's a good episode when even I'm done with it.
Yes. But at least we don't hear it in your voice. You're just you're expositioning your disdain for continuing right now.
Yeah.
This is hold up. Ryan's got a few more bits to say, and I like little lines like from the dinosaur. I dare you to find my ears.
Yeah.
Was surprisingly funny. There's a bit where he's fighting a villain in his nightmare, and this I don't like. You would know, so I thought this is with added context. It's funny. He's fighting a villain in his nightmares, and he kills the villain, and then he wakes up, and it's very obvious, like you're losing control, and here's what could happen if you keep going down this road. The villain he's fighting is a guy called Solomon Grundy. Solomon Grundy is a Batman villain, and his main thing is he's a zombie. He's undead. He cannot be killed to the point where Batman routinely kills him.
Yeah.
And when I thought about it, I was like, it's funny they used the one villain who couldn't be killed in this kind of metaphor in his dreams. But then I got to the idea of like, I like the idea of the Batman who does not kill any villain. When it gets to Solomon Grundy, he like really lets loose because he knows he can't die. So he's like, get proper violent. He's just like beating him like that Batman trailer, which is punching someone till they get brain damage over and over again. He's like, someone's like, calm down, Batman. It's like, relax, like it's the one chance he gets to someone else. Robin is like, just let him have this one because this is like his one chance to really let go. Also, there's a rhyme with Solomon Grundy. You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Solomon Grundy, born on a Monday, married on Tuesday, school on Tuesday, married on Wednesday, ill by Thursday, died by Friday, buried by Saturday, something on Sunday. That's the story of Solomon Grundy.
Right.
He said that's all he says. Like that's his whole dialogue.
Is that his whole shtick?
It's his whole shtick. The joke that we referenced earlier, which was great, was Zeus getting at the other gods for taking their turns and ruining them with Shazam. He goes, let me take over. I'm going to show you how it's really done. And I'm not going to play into your little petty issues that cause you guys to screw up. Like, I'm going to do it properly. And then immediately meet the Moon Emperor Queen.
Yeah.
And that Zeus immediately goes, well, hello there. I was like, that's a real understanding of Greek mythology.
Zeus fucked.
Exactly.
Like, Zeus was a capricious god and an egotistical god, and he fucked.
He's a real stop out. The gorillas appearing out of nowhere was a little bit Deus Ex character, but it was kind of a stab. Like, we knew they had a reason for going.
I mean, that's the one DC trope this didn't fall into, isn't it?
There wasn't much. That's why I said like that was the closest to.
There was a tiny bit of it with Marcy Marvel.
Yes, but she was with the siblings, I think. Like the siblings.
She was following him. She saw him.
Oh,
but his
yeah.
reference, she sort of says, you took a busload of gorillas to the moon.
Yes.
Or to Africa. You were pretty conspicuous there, my G. Like,
yes.
My G.
Yeah. Hitting Achilles in the heel.
Yeah,
again,
of course. But
nice.
if you give us Achilles, you have to hit him in the heel, don't you?
Yes. And last bit, which, as we did mention before, the point when he realizes that the house that was important to his family moving to a new, bigger house, they needed the old house, and it got destroyed in the fight with Black Adam. I thought that was just like a nice little bit of like, bring it down to earth. Like in all the big kind of superhero, like Superman fighting and going through skyscrapers. Like this was like a real, like, this is the damage you guys make when you have your big fights. And he does, like, admittedly, he does try to, he does think immediately, let's get to a less populated area, and it can't happen. But the fact of that happening, realizing the house has been destroyed, is still more for like you need to be even more careful, like in the future. So I thought that was a nice point. So yeah, those are my bits.
So, thank you very much for listening. If you have anything to do with Andertons, please get this to Captain Lee, because I want my Silver Sky. If you'd like to leave us a review, please do so. Anyway, you get your podcasts. Just make sure it's 5 stars and really offensive to us personally, to nobody else. We used to make shorts on YouTube. There might be some stuff coming on the YouTube, so make sure you're subscribed. There's an email address, comicliterate@gmail.com. I fucking hate doing this. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.
And you can hear that it's even worse when he's about to melt, which I can visually see as happening.
I am fat and ginger. I am sweating.
So, on that note, thank you. Goodbye.
Oh.